Wow, what a clutch break. Giant swing.
And that's it.
We have a champion before you're even able to realize what happened. Anakin pumped back. He's doing some interesting, Atlanta, ATL.
If he was coming from other countries, Atlanta would be the place to come for Tekken.
Atlanta has always had a very strong Tekken scene.
But,
why is that?
We have a lot of.
I've always been kind of curious. Why is that? Yeah. Like what?
Well, I'll put it like this.
To many people in the fighting game community, Atlanta is arguably the Tekken capital of America. The city has many of the strongest players in the country, including top players like Jackie Tran and Speed Kicks. You have the recent meme campaign to get a Waffle House stage in Tekken 8, which has connections to Atlanta, with Atlanta being the headquarters of the Waffle House franchise. But even outside of all that, I can tell you as somebody who grew up in Georgia that the first real-life person to introduce me to competitive fighting games was a Tekken player. And back in the day when arcades were still a thing, most of the kids gravitated to the Tekken cabinets. And at the time, I chalked this up to Tekken just being generally popular. But recently, it's had me thinking, why is Tekken so popular in Atlanta? I've kind of always felt like there had to be some kind of explanation for how this happened. Similar to the historical reasons behind why SNK games are popular in Latin America or why Soul Calibur is popular in France. This idea of region-specific popularity for certain games is super interesting to me. So, as a fighting game player born and raised in Georgia, I think it's only right that I do a deep dive to explain why Atlanta specifically became the Tekken capital of America. In the 1980s and well into the 1990s, arcades were a big part of gaming culture and youth culture as a whole. I don't think I need to explain what an arcade is to y'all. The main thing to note here is that the arcade business was very lucrative if you played your cards right, but this was easier said than done. One of the most important aspects of running a successful arcade was choosing the right games, and fighting games were one of the most attractive genres to include at the time. So much so that there was even a growing concern about the genre being oversaturated. While this was happening, home consoles were also becoming increasingly popular, and this ended up giving arcades a lot of competition in the gaming business. If kids could play video games at home, they had less of a reason to go to arcades. Arcade owners expressed a lot of concerns over this at the time, especially as 64-bit home consoles were starting to become a thing. This was pretty much the start of the arcade decline in America, and southern states like Georgia were hit particularly hard by the decline of arcade culture, particularly because southern states are not as walkable and have less public transit compared to places like New York, Boston, or the Bay Area of California. This means there is far less foot traffic, and less foot traffic means southern arcades don't get as much business from people that might randomly pass by. This is also why places like New York had a slower decline when it came to their arcade culture. New York is very similar to Japan in terms of being densely populated, walkable, and having a good public transit system. Legendary arcades like Chinatown Fair in downtown New York, where fighting game legends like Justin Wong and Yipes got started, were able to survive for so long for this very reason. So what does all of this have to do with Tekken and Atlanta? Well, I think some of you may be able to kind of sort of guess what happens next, but let me give you an actual in-depth explanation of what really went down. Let's jump ahead to the release of Tekken 3. Tekken 3 came out on the PS1 in 1997. It is the third entry in the series and is widely considered the entry that truly put the series on the map. And the timing of this game's release is what I believe started a chain reaction that kickstarted Georgia's Tekken culture. Let's break this down. Around 1997, consoles were becoming the primary way that people were getting into gaming in the South. So naturally, a lot of kids in the South would be playing Tekken 3. But this was happening all across the United States. Tekken was a popular game after all. So What makes Atlanta different? Well, now I know I said that arcades were experiencing a decline in Georgia, but they actually did not disappear completely around this time. We still had arcade machines and skating rinks and malls, but due to the smaller market for arcades compared to places like New York, owners had to take less risks with the machines they chose. Let's take another look at Playmeter magazine. This was an arcade magazine that many arcade business owners would use to keep up with what was going on in the arcade industry. They had a chart in every issue that showed the rankings of which arcade games were the most popular. For several issues, Tekken 3 pretty much dominated the charts over every other fighting game that was released at the time. I think you can see where I'm going with this. Arcades in the South were smaller with fewer machines and less business. So when they were deciding on which fighting games to include, Tekken 3 would be one of the only safe bets basically. On top of all that, Tekken 3 ran on the Namco System 12, which was very cheap compared to other arcade system competitors at the time, like the Sega Model 3, for example, which ran Virtua Fighter 3. In one arcade machine ad from Playmeter magazine, we can see that a Virtua Fighter 3 cabinet back then could cost around $5,198, while a Tekken 3 cabinet in the same ad cost $2,898. The impact that this price difference had on regional arcade cultures becomes even more clear when you look at how Virtua Fighter is played more in the northern states. Let's go on a little side quest to show what I'm talking about here. If you go to the Virtua Fighter community site and look at the local event page, the majority of local Virtua Fighter events in America are in northern states, more specifically New York. I did some digging on the Discord and found this message from longtime Virtua Fighter community veteran Chan Chai. He says, "The Dreamcast era was when we could actually play Virtua Fighter 3 consistently outside of maybe New York, Toronto, Seattle, Sunnyvale. In most of America throughout Virtua Fighter 3's life, the machine is so expensive that the one machine in the region is bouncing around arcades, university arcades, and bowling alleys. So the old community was limited on access and to major areas." So let's circle back. Cities with arcades that got more business could take more risks and include a more diverse selection of games. This meant that even when you were visiting arcades in those cities, even if something like Tekken was also popular in those areas, you still had players being spread out more across these different games basically, like in the case of Virtua Fighter and New York. Basically, they had more options. Whereas for Georgia, and most likely the South in general, by 1997, we were mainly only seeing Tekken in our malls and skating rinks as far as fighting games go. This is what started to funnel our player base more towards this one specific series because we saw fewer options. And as a result, arcade games were having what I'm going to call a billboard effect on console games. Kids would try out a game like Tekken 3 at a mall and then later get it on console. And this also worked in reverse. Kids will also play a game like Tekken 3 on console, and this would boost its popularity in the few arcades that we had left. In fact, while working on this video, I found out that this is literally how Tekken Pro player Anakin got into the series.
Like you said, Tekken is an arcade game first and foremost. And as a kid, every day or, on the weekends, my father would take me to we'd go family trip to the mall, and that mall had an arcade. And it all started off just me playing those redemption games, trying to get tickets and just being a little kid. But I saw that there was this one particular machine that just had a group of guys standing around it. And there was no other game in the entire arcade, whether it be air hockey or just, whack-a-mole. Nobody's really playing the game. Any game like they were playing Tekken. And I was so curious as a kid. I played a little bit of Tekken 3 because as a kid living in like a large apartment complex, the kids often traded games around, and I eventually just got my hands on Tekken 3. That was the first Tekken that I played, and when I saw Tekken in the arcades and I saw all those players, I thought, I'm gonna give it a shot. I beat up my sister, I beat up my father at home playing Tekken, and when I got that first received my first pounding from some of the local arcade guys, it was just, love at first sight.
So as we can see, the continued rise of home console gaming, along with Georgia's specific arcade economy at the time, had a big impact on popularizing Tekken, especially with Atlanta, Georgia being the most major city in the South. And this would naturally extend into Tekken's competitive tournament scene. And we can't talk about Atlanta or even America's competitive Tekken scene without talking about the legendary tournament series Final Round, or more specifically, Final Round's creator, Larry Dixon, aka ShinBlanka. ShinBlanka is a very important figure to Atlanta's FGC because his contributions to the community pretty much encapsulate all the reasons I've discussed when it comes to why Atlanta became the home of Tekken in the States. When ShinBlanka started hosting tournaments in Atlanta around the late 90s, he mainly did it for the purpose of giving his friends a space to show their skills and have bragging rights.
Yo, where you at, ATL? We got Pork Chop versus Upstate New York. Give it up, this shit's gonna be crazy. Somebody have a sandwich.
By around the third year of Final Round, the tournament series grew and had people from out of state coming to compete. How important was Final Round to building up that early Atlanta scene?
I mean, Final Round was more so for people out of town who wanted to play Clint the Beast, because Clint the Beast was the guy to play. So it was more so the Clint's Invitational in those early days. I mean, it was still called Final Round, but people knew it as the Clint's Invitational, like who would beat Clint the Beast, because he won 8 straight final rounds, but he won 9 final rounds. And then when the Koreans first started coming over, who was Knee and Min, Clint would probably beat them on the side, but as far as tournament wise, he would lose to people in America who knew how he played. But I would be the top placing American against those guys, and
Okay, yeah. So when these players came to Atlanta to compete, the tournaments were being run on console. Up to this point, most major fighting game tournaments on record in the US were run on arcade machines. More specifically, EVO, FKA, Battle of the Bay did not mainly use consoles until 2004. So this not only circles back to how home consoles impacted the South, but it also makes Final Round one of, if not the earliest major grassroots fighting game tournament in America to run on console.
Because back then, all the major events were arcade based. Final Round is the first console major in our community. Fast forward, 14 years, everyone's on console now.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, the arcade scene around America has pretty much went kaput, but it was just a necessary means for us in the South. All our arcades pretty much died probably 8 to 10 years ago.
So ShinBlanka's organizing efforts were a very big deal in the early years of the FGC, and in turn, his efforts would create a space that fostered some of the strongest Tekken players in the States. One of the venues that ShinBlanka would host tournaments at in the early 2000s was called Arario's Arcade. And it was actually at this arcade where Anakin would enter tournaments like this and hone his skills to eventually become one of the top players in the nation. And the player beside Anakin in this picture actually was the arcade owner's son, Arario, who would actually later go on to be the EVO champion for Tekken 5 in 2007. Poke Chop, Anakin, as well as EVO 2004 champion Jackie Tran also all got their early tournament experience at Final Round and ShinBlanka's organizing efforts in general.
One year, it was about 6 of us that finished top 8 at MLG. Yeah, we was extremely strong. Our B team was beating 18, other teams out there. Like the best in Texas was losing to our B team.
Yeah.
We was monsters.
Yeah.
It was monsters. But those hungry people, pretty much grew out of the game, got grown and had children, You know,
Eventually, ShinBlanka would go on to end the final round series by 2019 and retire from organizing events completely. I don't want to get too bogged down in explaining his reasons though. The main takeaway is that ShinBlanka's contributions played a key role in shaping the FGC and the competitive part of Tekken culture in Atlanta. So yeah, the decline of arcade culture in the 90s, the rise of home consoles, combined with the growing popularity of Tekken on the PS1, also combined with ShinBlanka's organizing efforts, all had a domino effect on Atlanta's Tekken scene. The players here can get very passionate. They mostly have always chosen pad over stick, possibly because of the home console history, and they are some of the strongest players in the country. And even though Tekken isn't my main fighting game, as someone who grew up in Georgia and spent a lot of time playing it, and even had a chance to attend Final Round myself before it ended, I figured it was very important to lay out the history behind how Atlanta became the Tekken Capital of America. Comment if you have thoughts, support if you like, and subscribe to support. It's GK. Peace out.